This is Agriculture Today. I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. Ahead of us on this Wednesday's program, we start with K-State and Washburn University School of Law professor Roger McEowen. He provides an ag law update on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which is set to expire in 2026. Also ahead, Jack Fry, K-State professor and commercial turf extension specialist, discusses a new variety of turf that K-State has played a key role in helping develop over the course of the last decade. We round out today's program with the Beef Cattle Institute's Ask the Experts, where K-State experts Brad White, Bryan Lubbers, and Phillip Lancaster answer a listener's question on how to pick the best replacement heifer. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for our bi-monthly Ag Law segment with Roger McEowen. He is a K-State and Washburn University School of Law professor. So, Roger, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Samantha.
Absolutely. So this week, I understand you wanted to talk about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or TCJA, as you have coined the acronym for it.
Well, more specifically, the impact of TCJA on estate planning this year as well as next year, because we just got some new numbers out with respect to the inflation-adjusted amount of the basic exclusion for 2023, and it really highlights what TCJA did, and that was a law that was enacted in the Trump administration. It took effect starting with tax years after 2017, and it goes through 2025, and from an estate planning standpoint, it increased the unified credit applicable exclusion, known as the basic exclusion amount, from $5 million to $10 million, and then indexed it for inflation. And we're currently setting for deaths in 2022 as well as taxable gifts made this year at $12.06 million, which means you don't have an estate tax problem at the federal level until your taxable estate exceeds that threshold. And there's not very many estates at all, let alone ag estates, that trip that level. Now, if you do, it's a big problem. But the exclusion being so high means that maybe some estate planning gets forgotten in the process because people are thinking, well, I don't have any tax problem at all. But estate planning is bigger than just tax.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, there's a lot of farmers and ranchers that won't have issues with this. But because of that, like you said, they neglect sometimes estate planning. So what really does estate planning involve for those producers?
Yeah, I think the basic point for many producers that won't face an estate tax, as well as for others, I think this is a comment that's general for everybody, is what we call income tax basis planning. And that means we want to cause property to be taxed in the decedent's estate at death, so that the recipients of that property get a stepped-up basis equal to the fair market value at death of that property. What that does is it wipes out all the appreciation in that value while the decedent held that property. And we've got a lot of farm and ranch property that's been held by an individual for 30, 40, 50 years, if not more, and their income tax basis may be really low. And so achieving that stepped-up basis at death by causing that property to be taxed in the estate is a big deal. And with the exemption so high, there probably won't be any estate tax concern at all for most people, but yet you still get the basis increase. That's really the beauty of the TCJA.
So down to the basics of what producers really need to know, what are the main issues that people need to understand?
Well, as I indicated, we want to try to utilize strategies to cause inclusion of the property in the taxable estate to get that basis step up. But I think for most people, you have to focus on avoiding common errors. And for some, it's getting started in the estate planning process to begin with. A lot of people haven't done anything, perhaps because they don't know where to start. So you need to get started. But for those that get started or those that already have a plan, take a look at it. A lot of plans that have been sitting there for a number of years have outdated language that needs to be modified in existing wills and trusts because the law has changed. And so what you want to look for there are what we call formula clause language that allocates a certain portion of the estate to go to, for example, a surviving spouse with a balance passing to the kids. Well, is that formula clause language still up to date? That's something that a professional needs to examine for you. And, of course, since the last time an estate plan was visited, maybe your goals and objectives have changed. Maybe you've acquired more land. Maybe you have different setup amongst family members that now maybe have different needs. Is there a special need that a particular heir has that indicates certain types of trust that may need to be created? What are health issues? Things change as time goes along, and therefore estate plans need to change with it. And so it's those basic things that we don't want to let slip through the cracks, so to speak, just because we think we don't have a tax problem. Estate planning, again, I come back to that, is much bigger than just tax.
Absolutely, yeah. And you've mentioned one of those things that it includes as well, which is the impact of inflation. You've mentioned that multiple times now. And obviously, in our current climate, we're experiencing a lot of inflation. So in terms of what producers need to keep in mind in these current times, what are some of those things that involve inflation that they should be planning for?
Yeah, that's a good question because there's really two aspects of inflation. One is we're seeing increase in land values across the country, and that's been the case for the past 2 or 3 years. Land values continue to be strong. Well, as land values increase, that increases the value of a farmer or rancher's estate. Land is the number one asset for most people in terms of value that they own. And so as those land values go up, it causes the estate value to rise. For example, I was looking at some data. Iowa land values now easily you can find tracts of land just average in excess of $10,000 per acre. Well, you get a 1,000-acre farm, and you're going to be pretty close to your exclusion amount right there. And so land value and the inflation impact of land values is a big deal. We have to watch that with respect to estate plans. The other aspect, the second aspect of inflation, is that it's eating away at the value of the dollars that you have in your hand. It's eroding retirement accounts. The stock market devaluation. The stock market's been coming down. That's collapsing retirement funds. And then the remaining funds that you have are buying less. So as part of estate planning is financial planning and the impacts of inflation that's eroding the current dollars that you have and maybe what you have been saving for retirement. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, so to speak, that impacts estate planning.
Absolutely. Yeah, good reminders for sure, and especially in terms of the current conditions we're living in. And then when it comes to the TCJA, it expires in 2026. So what do you think the estate tax exemption will be at that point when this thing that's put in place actually expires?
Boy, that is the great question. If we knew that, that would be really helpful. It would simply be helpful if Congress would pick a number, set it for inflation, index it for inflation, and leave it alone. But as you said, this law does expire at the end of 2025. So when we get to 2026, what's already baked in the law is that the exemption is going to drop to $5 million, adjusted for inflation in 2011 dollars. So most of us think it'll probably be between $7 and $8 million if Congress does nothing. That's where we go. Now, will they do nothing or will they change that? That's really the question there. And you asked what I think on this. I think they will do something between now and then. I don't think that it will drop back to the $5 million inflation-adjusted amount. It's never gone down except for what happened in 2010, and that was kind of an anomaly for 1 year. So I don't think it'll be less than where we're at now or what the inflation-adjusted amount is when we get to 2025. Which is probably going to be around $14-15 million. Just next year, it's going to go from $12.06 million this year to $12.92 million next year. We're going to have a 1-year increase just because of inflation of $860,000. That's the biggest ever. In fact, when I started practicing 30 years ago, the exclusion itself was only $600,000. Now we have a 1-year increase of $860,000. It's just incredible. So I suspect, if I were to put a number on it and guessing, I'd say there's probably a greater than 50% chance it'll be in the $15 million range when we get to 2026. But don't bet the farm on it.
Absolutely, yeah. Some key points for producers to keep in mind for sure. But Roger, if they're looking for more information on this topic, where can they find that at?
I've got a recent blog article out on this. It can be accessed from the homepage of my website, which is washburnlaw.edu/Walter, WALTR, and then down the left-hand side you can see the item to click on there. for the Agricultural Law and Tax Report, and it's a blog article of September 24.
Absolutely. Well, we'll have that linked in the show notes of today's program as well. But like I said, some excellent information for producers to just kind of be thinking about. I think it's sometimes hard for producers to think about these topics. It's not always the most thrilling thing or the most exciting thing to have to think about, but good information for sure. So thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Samantha.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Roger McEowen. He is a K-State and Washburn University School of Law Ag Law professor for our bi-monthly Ag Law Update. As always, if you are on the go and listening to us on the radio with one of our radio station partners, and you're wanting to listen to more from Agriculture Today, be sure to check out our podcast. We are available as a podcast anywhere podcasts can be found. Simply search for Agriculture Today, and you should find us there. Be sure to give us a listen, and that's also where the show notes for today's program can also be found, with all of the available links that are discussed during today's programming. Before we cut to a short break here momentarily, still ahead this Wednesday on Agriculture Today, we have Jack Fry. He is a K-State professor and our commercial turf extension specialist. And he's joining us to discuss a new variety of turf that K-State has helped play a key role in helping develop over the course of the last decade. This is in partnership with Texas A&M as well as Purdue. Also still ahead is our Beef Cattle Institute's Ask the Experts segment, where this week K-State experts Brad White, Bryan Lubbers, and Phillip Lancaster are answering a listener's question on how to pick the best replacement heifer. These guys share their vast array of knowledge as well as some fun, which we always enjoy. That and more is still to look forward to, so stay tuned for that and more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for a very special segment, a little bit of a unique one for our Ag Today listeners. It's going to be on turf. Joining us today, we have Jack Fry. He is a K-State professor and commercial turf extension specialist. So, Jack, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Samantha. It's good to be here today.
Absolutely. Well, we're glad to have you. And we're covering, like I said, turf, but specifically this new variety that you have releasing from Texas A&M, but K-State's played a big role in.
Definitely true. And just to give you an update, we've been working with Texas A&M since the early 2000s on development of zoysia grass varieties. And this particular release, which is still in the experimental form, but it's coming out in the next year or so. It's been formally approved for release from K-State, other universities, and you mentioned Texas A&M, AgriLife Dallas, it's located in Dallas, and Purdue University, all involved in development of this variety. So it's going to be really unique on its release and something that I'm very impressed with.
You mentioned this partnership's been since 2002 that you've been working with Texas A&M. How did that really come about?
Good question. You know, Texas A&M at that Dallas location has been involved in turfgrass development and breeding for many years. And prior to the current breeder, Dr. Ambika Chandra, and I've been working with her since the early 2000s. Prior to that, Dr. Milt Engelke was there for years. And I've worked with both of them. So they're doing the actual crossing and development of new genotypes at their location, growing them out, and then delivering, in this particular variety release, delivering those to us here in Manhattan and Olathe, and also Purdue, and want to see how well they survive and how well they do at those locations. And they also keep 1/3 of them and evaluate them down in Dallas. So through that process, we work and identify these new zoysia grasses that have superior quality and performance compared to what's out there that we use in Kansas and Indiana and throughout the Midwest and even in the South. And from that, we have identified at least one that's going to be out there and very impressive.
I know you guys haven't come up with a name, a coined name for this variety yet, but the experimental name, it's a bit long, so I'll have you say it. But you're really excited about this because it shows that it's going to hold up really well in a variety of areas.
Agree. It's currently called DALZ or DALZ 1701, and it does have numerous positive characteristics compared to the ones that's traditionally been used. And if you go out to many golf courses in our region and even some home lawns, you're going to find Meyer zoysia. Meyer's been around since the 1950s, which is amazing. There aren't that many varieties that have been around that long in turf. So if we compare this experimental to that, we're going to find numerous superior performance characteristics. We can run through all of them if you want to.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's chat through some of those. I know being cold hardy is one of the big ones, being that it was a transitional grass that you guys were trying to secure here. So let's talk through that.
So that's the first step. If we want something to fit in what we call the transition zone, which is basically that area of the U.S. where the north meets the south, and we've got to get through hot summers and very cold winters. We've got to find particular genotypes that get through that. So this is one that fits that. So it's got cold tolerance that's equivalent to Meyer zoysia. If you look at other things, drought tolerance is one that has stood out to me. Some in the Midwest might think, wow, Meyer zoysia is drought tolerant anyway. But this is one I think if we put in our region on the eastern part of the state, we could probably get some lawns and some golf courses through the summer months with minimal, very minimal irrigation, which I think would be very impressive. And that's assuming that they have reasonable soil characteristics in their lawns or on their golf courses. But they could get through those summer months with minimal irrigation. And the other side of that is, and we can't do it with Meyer and we can't do it with some others that have come out, we can also send it down to Dallas, and it's going to perform well even in that hot, very low rainfall area, and it's going to perform well down there as well. In addition to that, disease tolerance, in particular one called large patch, and large patch is really the only disease we focus on in zoysia grass, so it's got tolerance. It's not totally resistant, but it's got tolerance to it. It's got great quality through the growing season. All those things together are going to make it something that's impressive. And if anybody goes out to see it, for example, at our field day or at a grower, the other thing that's going to stand out to you is its dark green genetic color. A lot of our lawns, whether they're tall fescue or bluegrass or even some zoysias, you've got to put fertilizer on them to make them greener. 1701, the ones coming out, you might fertilize once a year with very little fertilizer, and it retains that dark green color through the growing season, which is very impressive.
Absolutely, a trait that many hope for, especially golf courses as well. That's such a big attribute of a good golf course as well, you know, that pretty lush green color. And then in terms of the process of this, I think you mentioned that it's been a decade in the making, really, and this is an intensive research process. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's kind of a long-term, complicated process, but to give you an idea, again, Texas A&M, Dallas, Dr. Chandra, and others that work with her, Dr. Dennis Genovese has been really a good contributor. He's involved in it as well. So they will do crossing of individual plants and get seed production from those plants. They will then plant the individual seeds and get new genotypes to grow out. And I should mention that the crossing that they're doing is looking at really high-quality southern types of zoysia that do not survive winters in the Midwest. So that's one of the parents. But then they will take the other parent to be, or maybe multiple parents over time. The other parent is going to be one that has cold hardiness. So we're getting the high quality together with cold hardiness, putting those together to develop one that fits well in the Midwest in the transition zone. Once they get those to grow out, they send those individual plants, individual plugs we could call them, about 2 inches in diameter, over to Indiana, Purdue, over to us here in Olathe, Kansas at the K-State Olathe Horticulture Research Center. We grow those plugs out for a couple of winters and see which ones survive and which ones have good quality. We'll find those, identify them. In this case, we picked 20 at each location, so 20 out of Indiana, 20 out of Texas, 20 out of K-State. Put them together. They will then be propagated some more by Texas A&M. And we get enough of them, enough plugs to plant in what we call 5 or 25 square foot plots that are replicated, and we can evaluate them over years, in some cases under what we would consider golf course fairway or tee mowing heights, in some cases under lawn heights, and not just those 3 universities, but we also pull in other universities across the transition zone. Up to 10 universities may be involved, including Missouri, Oklahoma State, Arkansas, North Carolina State, and others, just to see that performance. And then we got a lot of data coming in. We look at it, we see how well they perform, and in some cases we're looking at some of those characteristics we talked about. Did they survive the winter? Did they have tolerance to disease? What did they tolerate that mowing height or whatever? And from that, we narrow things down even more, maybe top 10 for a while, and then ultimately top 3 out of what we started with was thousands. And then from those top 3, it takes us a year or two, and we say, oh, this is the one. We have a meeting and make that decision. And that's where we're at. So again, K-State has approved release of this variety. Texas A&M, Purdue are going through the process as well. And the plan is that starting next year, we're hoping it's going to be getting out to growers and they're going to start expanding it. And again, to remind everybody, this is a vegetative variety. It is not a seeded type, so it has to be propagated through what we call sod or plugs or sprigs. And we can harvest that sod, break it up, and do what we call sprigging. So that's the way it would have to be propagated. And the other thing that's important to mention is that the sponsor for this research has been the United States Golf Association. You probably watch the USGA tournament once a year on TV, but they're also very involved in turf research and sponsoring that turf research. So we're very grateful for the support that they provided and support for graduate students to go through the process and graduate from K-State and other schools as well.
Really cool to have the backing of a sponsor as big as the United States Golf Association. And what a labor of love, a decade worth of time and research and money spent on this variety. So hopefully those tuning in will be keeping their eyes peeled, their ears open for when they can expect to have it in their own lawns potentially soon.
I agree, and I certainly hope to be reaching out to multiple growers in the Midwest and others and speaking with them, and already have. We've already had this particular one go out to several growers not too far away from here and some over in Indiana, and a few golf courses looking at it as well, and just so they get some background information on it. So as time moves forward, we'll be more specific about where you can find it and when it's going to be available.
Excellent. Well, one of those opportunities to learn more about it and ask you some questions, I'm sure, is the upcoming Kansas Turf and Landscape Conferences going on November 30th and December 1st. So tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, so we've had an annual conference here at K-State since 1950. So this is going to be our 72nd conference. We draw on a lot of commercial turf industry people. They're from the golf course industry, sports turf managers, lawn and landscape companies, parks and rec. So we get a number across the board, and we'll get about 600, and they're going to be down in downtown Manhattan, again, November 30, December 1. And very good conference, very good speakers. We've got 3 good out-of-state speakers coming in this year. And a lot of focus, and it's very good for the industry, is on pest control. And a lot of them want to get, pesticide recertification credit, and we make that available to many. And not just education and information, but interaction within the industry. And that's as important as anything. And I think it's even more important now that we're kind of, hopefully, getting towards the end of the pandemic so that we can interact and get back to what we were used to. So it's a really good opportunity for that.
Well, I'm going to have that linked, the website linked for more information on the conference in the show notes of today's program, which can be found on agtoday.net. So if you're interested in attending and learning more about turf and landscape, that will be linked in our show notes, like I mentioned. But Jack, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great learning about some turf.
Thank you, Samantha. It was fun. And for those listening and those in the industry, I look forward to seeing you later this year.
Absolutely. Well, once again, that was Jack Fry. He is a professor and commercial turf extension specialist here at K-State, sharing more about a new variety in partnership with Texas A&M. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are rounding out today's program with our Beef Cattle Institute's Ask the Experts. This week, our experts Brad White, Bryan Lubbers, and Phillip Lancaster answer our listener's question on what to look for in a replacement heifer.
Hi, welcome to Beef Cattle Institute's Ask the Experts. I'm Brad White. With me today is Dr. Bryan Lubbers, Food Animal Therapeutics here at Kansas State.
Hi, Brad.
And Dr. Phillip Lancaster, beef nutritionist, also at Kansas State.
Hello, Brad.
We find the right experts to answer your production questions. So if you have a question, you can send it to us at bci@ksu.edu. And our format is I'll ask each expert the same question. They get a chance to respond, and they can earn up to 10 points based on the quality of their answers. This is your week, Bryan. You can do it.
I feel it.
Okay, so let's get started with today's question, which is, I'm keeping replacement heifers this year. I need to sort through all my heifers at weaning and decide which ones I want to keep in the herd. What advice do you have for me? Bryan, you get to go first.
I was going to defer to the second half. Actually, I saw a very interesting tweet a couple weeks ago about choosing animals that fit their environment. I think I may have tweeted it, but everything on Twitter is true. So when I'm looking at replacement heifers, one of the big criteria for me is going to be how well are they fitting what I'm trying to do operationally. So, if I've got resource limited, I may try to choose phenotypically more efficient animals. Everybody's interested in reproduction, so reproduction needs to be part of it. But I'm trying to match up body size to environment.
Excellent. I totally agree. And I think good to go back to the resources and how well they match. Also good to quote yourself and use that as a reference. Phillip?
I think a couple criteria to pay attention to is age and weight. Age-wise, the older heifers are more likely to reach puberty before breeding season. So those heifers are top candidates to pick, but you had to keep track of calving dates to do that very well. Also, weight. Obviously, the bigger, heavier heifers are probably going to reach that 60-65% of their mature weight faster. But they also may be bigger heifers altogether, and so that can be a negative that would hurt your efficiency of the ranch. And so there's two things to pay attention to, but bigger or the maximum is not always the best when it comes to weight.
Okay. So, Bryan, I'm going to pin you down a little bit, going back to you, because you said match the resources to the environment. How specifically am I going to do that when I pick my heifers at weaning, and you're playing with a small lead at this point? So have a good answer.
Okay. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. Well, I'm going to encourage producers to cheat a little bit, right? So you're obviously going to use all the information you have. And so you're going to look at the dam, right? If it's a heifer from a dam that's doing well in my operation and fitting well into what I'm trying to do, she's efficient for the resources she has, and kind of what Phillip was saying, she's not oversized, she's not undersized. She has a good history of reproduction in my herd. I'm probably using that information to help pick on the heifers too.
Excellent. Phillip?
So I would agree with Bryan, paying attention to the dam, but also maybe paying attention to the sire. If you've got multiple sire pastures, then paying attention to things like scrotal circumference, EPDs, or heifer pregnancy EPDs, and selecting your heifers based on the sire if you had multiple pastures with different sires. And you can tell which heifer came from which sire.
Which may be challenging to sort out. If I have multiple sire paddocks, it may be challenging to sort out which came from which. I like the points that you guys brought up, the overall theme, trying to match those heifers to the environment with some of the key criteria as age and weight. One of the things, Phillip, you brought up, potentially, I don't want always the biggest, but I have to know at weaning what the biggest is relative to her age. So tracking things, if I really want to plan this well, I need to start tracking at birth, follow them through, and ideally put myself in a scenario. Bryan, I liked your point. The more information I have, the better off I am relative to sire, dam, any future consequences. So tallying up the scores, Bryan, you ended up eking it out with 8, and Phillip had 7.5, which we've never had a half point before, and I'm not even sure how he got that. So if you have any questions, comments, you can certainly email us for future episodes at bci@ksu.edu.
Once again, those were Beef Cattle Institute experts Brad White, Phillip Lancaster, and Bryan Lubbers for this week's BCI's Ask the Experts. That concludes today's programming. We'll be back with more tomorrow on Agriculture Today.